All right, buckle up because today we're going deep, deep into some interesting stuff.
Oh, sounds intriguing. What are we diving into today?
Well, we're tackling this YouTube video. It's by Richard Smith, and it's called, get this, Banned on Social, Now Re-Edited. The Truth They Don't Want You to Know.
Wow, that's quite a title.
It definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. What's the big secret he's revealing?
Well, Smith basically says everything we think we know about nutrition is completely wrong. He says he reversed his diabetes, got rid of his obesity, migraines, like all sorts of health issues by ditching conventional nutrition and going all in on keto.
Those personal stories can be pretty powerful, especially if you're struggling with similar things.
Right. Makes you want to listen.
It does, but it's important to remember, personal experience isn't the same as scientific evidence.
True, true. Okay, so before we get into all of his claims, let's start with Smith's story. And he does not hold back about how bad his health was before keto.
Oh, like what?
He talks about these really awful migraines, like so bad they would even cause temporary blindness, and anxiety so bad he couldn't even leave the house.
Wow.
And he even had trouble just walking up the stairs.
Sounds like he's desperate for a solution.
Totally. And he says he tried everything, all the diets, all the healthy eating advice, and things just kept getting worse.
Makes sense. He started thinking, maybe this is just how it is, just my age, just genetics.
Yeah, he really thought that it was just his lot in life.
But then he finds keto.
Then he finds keto. All right, so let's get into his argument, right? He's basically saying weight gain and loss, it's not about calories in versus calories out.
Oh, interesting. What does he say it is then?
He says it's all about hormones.
Okay.
And he specifically targets the typical high-carb diet, calls out sugar as this addictive substance that messes with your insulin and leads to storing too much fat.
Well, hormones definitely play a huge role in weight, but the calorie model isn't completely wrong. It's just, simplified. Our bodies are complicated.
He doesn't stop there, though. He goes after vegetable oils.
Even the heart-healthy ones.
Oh, yeah, all of them. Says they're full of omega-6 fatty acids that cause inflammation and insulin resistance.
He's got a point that too much omega-6 can be a problem. But you can't just say all vegetable oils are bad. The type of oil, how it's processed, your whole diet, it all plays a part.
Okay. And he doesn't like grains either.
Really.
What's wrong with grains?
He says they're packed with these things called lectins. Says they mess with your hormones, make it hard to feel full, damage your gut, even cause autoimmune diseases.
I mean, our ancestors have eaten grains for a long time without all those problems. More research is needed there, I think.
So he's basically tearing down all the conventional stuff, and then his solution is?
Let me guess, keto.
Keto. He describes it as this natural state where your body burns fat for fuel instead of carbs.
Physiologically, that's accurate. Cut carbs drastically, your body does switch to using ketones, which come from fat, for energy. He makes this big contrast between the spiking and crashing energy on a high-carb diet versus the sustained energy on keto.
I can see why that would appeal to people.
Oh, yeah. Lots of people struggle with those energy dips. And he talks about the keto flu, too, that awful feeling when you first start.
Oh, yeah. The keto flu is definitely real. A lot of people go through that.
Yeah.
Electrolyte imbalances and the body adjusting to using ketones, probably.
And now, here comes the eyebrow-raising part. He lists 10 benefits of ketosis, and some are pretty wild. Reduced inflammation, better brain function, better heart health, better athletic performance, stronger bones, even fighting cancer and living longer.
Some of those do have some scientific backing, but a lot need more research. And what works for one person might not work for another.
So let's break down some of these claims. He keeps talking about this molecule, BHB, says it's key in reducing inflammation and protecting against Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Any truth to that?
So BHB is one of the ketones your body makes during ketosis. And there are studies, early studies, that suggest it might have anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective properties. But it's way too soon to call it a miracle cure.
Okay, so possible, but needs more research. What about heart function and blood flow? He says keto boosts those too.
Again, there are studies pointing to possible benefits, but we need more evidence. And everyone responds to keto differently, so it's not a guarantee.
He even says keto can make athletes perform better and burn more fat during exercise.
Some athletes do report improvements, but some see their performance decline. Evidence is mixed. Depends on the sport, the person, lots of factors.
So, not a universal solution for athletes then. What about stronger bones? He claims that's a benefit too.
Bone health is complicated. Calcium, vitamin D, exercise, lots of things matter. Some studies show a possible positive impact on bone density, but we don't know the long-term effects.
And then the cancer claim. He says cancer cells can't use ketones for fuel, so keto basically starves them.
It's an interesting idea, and there is some early research looking at ketogenic diets as a possible complementary therapy for cancer. But we need a lot more research before we can say anything definitive.
So not a proven cancer treatment, but maybe something to explore further. What about downsides? Anything people should be aware of?
Well, the keto flu can be brutal,
Yeah.
and you have to plan carefully or you might end up with nutrient deficiencies. And for many people, sticking to a really restrictive diet long-term is hard. It's not a decision to take lightly.
And obviously anyone thinking about doing this should talk to their doctor, especially if they have any health problems.
Absolutely crucial. Always work with a healthcare professional for something like this.
So Smith doesn't just promote keto, he also addresses the criticisms. Let's see how he handles those.
I'm curious to hear his responses. He tends to have a very strong opinion,
He starts with ketoacidosis.
which can be life-threatening, but it's mostly a concern for people with type 1 diabetes who don't make insulin. Extremely rare in healthy people doing keto.
Smith stresses that, saying even type 1 diabetics can do keto safely if they manage their insulin properly.
Which is true, but anyone with diabetes needs to work closely with their doctor before changing their diet.
Then he talks about gluconeogenesis, which is where your body makes glucose from protein. Some people worry eating too much protein on keto will kick them out of ketosis.
Right, but your body only does that if it needs to. As long as you're getting enough fat, it's not a problem.
Smith explains that gluconeogenesis is essential, provides glucose for the parts of our bodies that can't use ketones.
Exactly. It's a totally normal and necessary process.
Next up, he tackles the idea you can't build muscle on a low-carb diet.
I'm ready for this one. I've always heard you need carbs to build muscle.
He says you don't need them at all. Even cites a study that found no difference in muscle growth between people who ate protein with carbs versus just protein.
Interesting. There are studies that suggest you can still build muscle without carbs in your diet.
He even suggests that combining protein with fat, like you do on keto, might be even better for muscle growth than protein with carbs.
Bold claim. Some research hints at that, but we need more studies to be sure.
Okay, so maybe carbs aren't absolutely essential for muscle. But what about athletes who need those quick bursts of energy?
That's what everyone thinks, and Smith directly challenges that.
He talks about this guy, Professor Tim Noakes, wrote the book on carb loading for endurance athletes. But then Noakes admitted he was wrong, said a high-carb approach actually gave him health problems, including type 2 diabetes.
Wow, talk about a change of heart. It shows how our understanding of nutrition is constantly evolving. Even leading experts can change their views.
Makes you wonder what else we think is true now that might be proven wrong later, right?
Absolutely. It's a good reminder to be open to new information and question everything.
So Smith uses that to say you don't need carbs for athletic performance. Says being in ketosis makes your body better at using lactate, which you make during exercise, for fuel.
Physiologically, that's accurate. When you're low on carbs, your body gets better at using lactate for energy.
So maybe ditching carbs could actually help athletes.
It's possible, but more research is needed to know for sure how keto impacts different sports and athletes.
Okay, so we've done ketoacidosis, gluconeogenesis, and muscle building. What else does he address?
Fasting. It often comes up with keto.
Right. He says it's not about starving yourself, but more about restricting when you eat to give your body a break from digestion.
Time-restricted feeding, he calls it.
He talks about this thing called autophagy, where your body cleans up and repairs cells. Says fasting can help with that.
More and more research is showing that fasting, or intermittent fasting, can help with autophagy and has other benefits like reducing inflammation and improving insulin sensitivity.
He says keto and fasting work well together because your body can easily use stored fat for energy when you're in ketosis.
That's true. Being fat adapted means your body can easily switch to burning stored fat when you're fasting.
And he says not to overeat when you break a fast. Start with small, protein and fat-rich meals, not carbs.
Good advice. After fasting, your body might be really sensitive to insulin, so a big carb meal could spike your blood sugar too quickly.
Okay, so keto and fasting, lots to think about there. But what about the big one, the one everyone always argues about?
You mean cholesterol?
Cholesterol. And Smith really goes for it. Starts by saying that the group that originally warned about cholesterol now says it's not a big deal to eat too much of it.
It's true that our understanding of cholesterol has changed. We used to demonize it, but now we know dietary cholesterol doesn't really affect blood cholesterol levels for most people.
He emphasizes that cholesterol is vital for life, for cells, hormones, nutrient absorption, even healing. He tells a story about how one of his wounds healed incredibly fast, even though he had high cholesterol.
Personal stories can be interesting, but they don't prove anything scientifically. But yes, cholesterol is important for many things in the body.
And then he tackles the big fear that cholesterol clogs your arteries and causes heart disease. He says it's just not true.
Well, it's more complicated than that. Cholesterol is present in arterial plaques, but those plaques form from a complex process involving many factors, including inflammation. It's not just cholesterol by itself.
He blames eating too many carbs for damaging the glycocalyx, which he says is the artery wall's first line of defense. Says all those blood sugar spikes wear down that protection, making arteries more vulnerable.
He's talking about the endothelial glycocalyx, a layer of molecules lining our blood vessels. It does play a role in vascular health, and some research suggests high blood sugar can damage it. But we're still learning about the connection between that damage and atherosclerosis.
And then he goes into the different types of cholesterol particles, saying not all LDL, the bad cholesterol, is the same.
It's important to understand the subtypes of LDL here.
He talks about VLDL, IDL, and LDL, describing them like buses that transport lipids. Says LDL wants to heal the body, not damage it, and that it only becomes a problem when it gets damaged and contributes to plaque.
He's simplifying things a bit, but there is some truth there. LDL particles can get oxidized or glycated, which makes them more likely to contribute to plaque buildup. It's not just about the amount of LDL, but also its quality.
He blames eating too many carbs and those seed oils he was talking about earlier for damaging LDL particles.
He's talking about glycation, where sugar sticks to LDL, and oxidation, where free radicals damage LDL. Both processes make LDL more likely to cause atherosclerosis.
So it's not cholesterol itself, but what happens to it when we eat a diet high in carbs and certain oils.
That's his argument. There's some evidence to support this, but heart disease is complex, caused by many things. It's not a simple equation.
And then there's the two types of LDL, pattern A and pattern B. He says A is good and B is the bad kind that causes problems.
Those are subtypes of LDL. And some research suggests pattern B might be more likely to contribute to atherosclerosis. But scientists are still debating how important these subtypes are for our health.
He even mentions a study that found people with lower LDL actually had a higher risk of dying from any cause.
There are studies showing similar things. But just because two things are correlated doesn't mean one causes the other. We need more research to understand the link between LDL and mortality.
So maybe we don't need to be so afraid of cholesterol after all. But what about saturated fat? Everyone says that's bad for you too.
And this is another place where Smith challenges conventional wisdom.
He says the idea that saturated fat is bad for us has been around forever, but there's not much evidence to support it. Cites studies, including one where people who ate saturated fat actually had a lower risk of dying than those who ate vegetable oils.
He's referring to the Minnesota coronary artery experiment, which is often cited by people who support eating saturated fat. But that study has been criticized for some of its methods.
He also mentions a meta-analysis that found no link between saturated fat and heart disease.
Some meta-analyses haven't found a link, but others have. The research on saturated fat is complicated and doesn't give us a clear answer. We need more research.
He really goes after this guy, Ansel Keys, the scientist whose research in the 50s made everyone afraid of saturated fat, accuses him of cherry-picking data to fit his theory.
Ansel Keys' work has been debated a lot over the years. It was influential, but we need to acknowledge its limitations and consider other perspectives.
So basically, Smith is saying, don't fear saturated fat, embrace it. He even recommends cooking with butter and tallow.
Which brings us to his fifth and final rule. Eat lots of natural fats and protein.
Exactly. He's all about real food, like meat, eggs, fish, cheese, and vegetables. No processed foods or grains, no vegetable oils.
It's similar to a lot of ancestral diets, focusing on foods humans have eaten for a long time.
And he wraps it all up by saying, this keto lifestyle based on ancestral eating is the key to a healthy immune system, preventing disease, and living longer.
It's a compelling story, but like we've discussed, there are nuances and complexities. We can't just take everything he says as fact.
Absolutely. A lot to think about already, and we're just getting started.
It is a lot to unpack. We've only just begun to delve into his key claims.
All right, so we've explored Smith's personal journey and his criticisms of the usual dietary advice.
And we've started looking at his keto rules, his foundation for optimal health.
Some of his points are pretty interesting, even if they sound a little extreme sometimes.
Definitely makes you think. So where do we go next with Smith's keto claims?
Well, I'd like to hear more about his views on grains and seed oils. Those are the two things he really doesn't want people to eat. I'm wondering why.
He definitely makes them sound like the bad guys in the nutrition world.
Right. Like almost every health problem today comes from eating those.
We have to be careful about those claims. Let's start with grains. Smith really focuses on lectins, those proteins found in grains, and some other plants too.
He says lectins interfere with hormones, block nutrients, damage your gut, and even contribute to autoimmune diseases. It's a bit scary hearing that.
I understand the concern. But think about it. Lots of cultures around the world have eaten grains for centuries and thrived. So some research suggests lectins might have some effects, but we can't just say all grains are bad for everyone.
So it's not that simple.
No. It's about the details, about understanding that people react differently to foods and making choices that are right for you.
That makes sense. Okay, what about seed oils? He really seems to hate those.
He does. He says they're full of omega-6 fatty acids, especially linoleic acid, and that leads to a bunch of problems like inflammation and insulin resistance, even fat storage and liver damage.
He even says seed oils cause heart disease, obesity, cancer, and Alzheimer's. That's a lot.
It's important to remember that just because something happens alongside something else doesn't mean one caused the other. So just because those health problems are more common in people who eat a lot of seed oils doesn't mean the oils are the cause.
Right. Other things in their lives could be causing those problems too.
Exactly. And while it's true that too much omega-6 compared to omega-3 can cause inflammation, we need more research to know exactly how different seed oils affect us.
So saying all seed oils are bad is oversimplifying it?
Definitely. You have to consider the type of oil, the fatty acids in it, how it's processed, and you need to make sure you're getting enough omega-3s from things like fatty fish.
So maybe it's not about eliminating seed oils entirely, but choosing them carefully and not eating too much.
That's a more balanced approach, making smart choices based on the evidence and what your body needs.
Okay, that's helpful. So we've got cutting grains, limiting seed oils. What's next on his list of keto rules?
His third rule is restrict carbohydrates. That's like the core of the keto diet, right?
Yeah, it is. The whole point of keto is to eat way fewer carbs so your body starts burning ketones for energy instead of glucose. Smith talks about how people on high-carb diets have those ups and downs in energy, those spikes and crashes, compared to the steady energy you supposedly get on keto. I know a lot of people who struggle with that.
A lot of people do report having more stable energy on keto because their blood sugar isn't going up and down as much.
But he also talks about the keto flu, that awful feeling some people get when they first start. Is that real, and what causes it?
It is real, not just a myth.
He says it's because your body is detoxing as it gets used to using a new fuel source. What do you think about that?
That detoxification idea is popular, but it's not really accurate. It's probably more about electrolyte imbalances, changes in your gut bacteria, and your body adjusting to using ketones.
So it's not about toxins being flushed out, but more about your body adapting to a new way of working.
Exactly. And that adaptation can be rough for some people, which is where those keto flu symptoms come in.
Makes sense. He's really big on electrolytes, especially sodium, when you're starting keto. Why is that so important?
When you cut carbs like that, your body gets rid of more sodium and water, which messes with your electrolytes and can cause those keto flu symptoms like tiredness, headaches, and muscle cramps.
So just cutting carbs isn't enough. You have to pay attention to your electrolytes too.
Yes, exactly. You need to replenish those electrolytes, especially sodium, to minimize those side effects and make sure your body functions properly.
He even says that essential hypertension, high blood pressure, is caused by high insulin levels. Is that something doctors agree on?
That's a more controversial idea. While insulin resistance can play a role in high blood pressure, it's not the only cause. There are other factors involved, like genetics, lifestyle, and overall health.
So managing insulin is important for being healthy, but it's not a guaranteed fix for high blood pressure.
Right. It's always best to work with your doctor for specific health concerns.
Okay, so we've got cutting grains, limiting seed oils, restricting carbs. What's the next rule?
His fourth rule is all about electrolytes, which we just talked about. He believes they're important for everyone, not just people on keto.
So he thinks most people don't get enough electrolytes in their diet.
That's what he says. He even suggests that the right amount of sodium for most people is way higher than what's currently recommended.
He's really pushing the sodium. But isn't too much sodium bad for us?
It's complicated. The ideal amount of sodium probably depends on the person and their health. Some people might need to increase their sodium, while others might need to limit it, especially those with certain health conditions.
So there's no one-size-fits-all answer for sodium. It's about finding what your body needs.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what's right for you, and talking to your doctor can help with that.
Okay, makes sense. What's his last keto rule?
His fifth rule is to consume lots of natural fats and proteins. It's a big part of his philosophy.
He's really emphasizing that. He wants people to focus on real food, like meat, eggs, fish, cheese, and non-starchy vegetables.
He does. And he really separates those whole unprocessed foods from what he calls frankenfoods, all those processed foods that are so common today. I think a lot of people want to eat more natural foods.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming with all those processed foods, and wanting to eat more naturally makes sense.
There's no doubt that processed foods, with all their added sugar, unhealthy fats, and artificial stuff, cause a lot of health problems. Eating whole, unprocessed foods is a good way to improve your health.
So he wants us to go back to eating more like our ancestors did before processed foods were everywhere.
You could say that. He thinks those natural foods give us all the nutrients we need without the bad stuff in processed food.
But is it really that easy? Can we just eat as much of those real foods as we want?
While focusing on those foods is a good start, you still have to think about portions and balance in your diet. You can eat too much of even healthy foods.
So moderation and balance are still important, even if you're eating mostly whole, unprocessed foods.
Absolutely. It's not a free pass to eat all the steak and butter you want.
Okay, good to remember. So we've covered all 5 of his rules, from cutting grains and seed oils to restricting carbs, getting enough electrolytes, and eating natural fats and proteins. That's a pretty specific way to eat.
It is. It goes against a lot of the usual dietary advice.
And while some of it is a bit extreme, I have to admit some of it makes sense. Makes me think about what I eat.
It definitely gives you something to think about. But remember, it's just one perspective. There are other ways to eat healthily. It's about finding what works for you, looking at the evidence, and making informed decisions.
Well said. Now, I want to talk about some of the specific benefits Smith says come with a ketogenic lifestyle. He makes some big claims about how much it can change your health.
Let's hear them. He's very passionate about how keto can improve your health and well-being.
He starts with insulin sensitivity, which is how well your body uses insulin to control blood sugar.
And that is a key benefit of keto, and research supports it. When you eat fewer carbs, your insulin levels go down, and that can improve your insulin sensitivity over time.
He says that when you constantly eat carbs, your cells can become resistant to insulin, which makes it hard for glucose to get into the cells where it's needed for energy.
Right, and that insulin resistance can lead to a lot of health problems like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and even some types of cancer.
Smith says switching to keto basically resets your insulin sensitivity, so your cells respond to insulin better and control blood sugar more effectively.
There's more and more research suggesting that keto can improve insulin sensitivity and glucose control, especially in people with type 2 diabetes. So there's definitely some science behind that claim.
So keto can help with insulin sensitivity, that's good. But then he goes on and on about ketones, specifically beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB, calls it a miracle molecule. I always get a little skeptical when I hear that kind of stuff.
It's smart to be cautious.
Yeah.
BHB does have some interesting properties, but we shouldn't exaggerate its potential.
So what is BHB exactly, and what evidence is there for these supposed miraculous benefits?
BHB is one of the main ketones your body makes when you're in ketosis. Smith claims it has all these amazing benefits, from reducing inflammation and protecting your brain to boosting athletic performance and fighting cancer.
That's a lot of benefits. It's hard to know where to even start.
Let's take it one claim at a time and see what the evidence says. We can start with his claims about BHB reducing inflammation.
Okay, let's do that. What does he say about BHB and inflammation?
He says BHB blocks something called the NLRP3 inflammasome, which triggers inflammation. He thinks that by blocking this pathway, BHB can help reduce inflammation throughout your body.
Is there any truth to that? Is there evidence that BHB actually reduces inflammation?
There is some research that suggests BHB might reduce inflammation, but this research is still very new. We can't say for sure yet if BHB has a significant impact on inflammation in people.
So more research is needed. What else does he say BHB can do?
He talks about BHB protecting your brain. He says it can cross the blood-brain barrier, giving your brain cells another source of energy and protecting them from damage.
That sounds impressive. What's the evidence for that?
There's some early evidence that suggests BHB might be neuroprotective. Some studies have shown that it can protect brain cells from certain types of damage, But these studies were done in labs, not in people.
So BHB could help protect the brain, but we need more research, especially research in humans.
Exactly.
He also connects this to a lower risk of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Is there evidence for that?
It's an interesting area of research, but it's too early to say for sure if BHB actually has a significant impact on those diseases.
So a possibility, but we need more research. Let's talk about his claims about BHB improving athletic performance. I'm always interested in things that can help athletes naturally.
He says BHB can give athletes a steady source of energy so they don't get tired as easily and can perform better for longer.
Is there evidence to support that?
Some studies have shown that ketone supplements can improve performance in certain endurance events.
So there's some evidence for that, at least in certain situations. He also says BHB can increase fat burning during exercise. True.
That's more controversial. Being in ketosis does increase fat burning, but it doesn't always mean you'll perform better.
So just because you're burning more fat doesn't mean you'll be a better athlete. It's more complicated than that.
Exactly. And everyone responds differently to keto and ketone supplements. What works for one person may not work for another.
So BHB isn't necessarily a magic solution for athletes. What about his claim that BHB can fight cancer? That's a big one.
It is, and one that we should be very careful with.
He says that because cancer cells mostly use glucose for energy, if you switch to a keto diet and deprive them of glucose, you can slow their growth.
That's the idea behind using keto as a possible additional therapy for cancer.
He even says that BHB has been shown to kill pancreatic cancer cells and shrink brain tumors. That's really hopeful. Is there any evidence for that?
There is some preliminary research looking at this, but these studies were done in labs, not in people. The evidence isn't strong enough to say for sure.
So we can't say for sure that BHB has any effect on cancer in humans. We need more research.
Yes, we do. And it's important to remember that cancer is complicated. There's no single easy solution.
And anyone with cancer should definitely talk to a doctor for proper treatment.
Absolutely. It's crucial to get sound medical advice and avoid potentially harmful misinformation.
Okay, so we've talked about BHB and its possible benefits for inflammation, brain health, athletic performance, and cancer. Sounds like there's some potential there, but we need a lot more research before we make any conclusions.
That's a good summary. We need to be careful about what the scientific evidence actually tells us.
Well said. Now let's hear what Smith says about keto and longevity. He seems to think that eating this way can make you live longer.
He does. He thinks that keto, along with other things like exercise and managing stress, can slow down aging and help you live longer.
I've heard about aging gracefully, and it sounds like Smith thinks keto is a big part of that. What does he say about how keto affects aging?
He has a few ideas about how keto impacts lifespan. One of his main arguments is about the role of insulin and a hormone called IGF-1.
Okay, I've heard of IGF-1, but I don't really know what it does. Can you explain that a little?
IGF-1 is a hormone that helps us grow and develop. It's especially important when we're young, but it still has effects as adults.
So what does IGF-1 have to do with aging?
Well, while IGF-1 is necessary for growth, some research suggests that if your IGF-1 levels are constantly high, it might increase your risk of certain diseases that come with age, like cancer.
So too much IGF-1 could be a bad thing as we get older. How does this relate to keto?
Smith says that by cutting carbs and lowering insulin levels, keto can also lower IGF-1 levels, which might lower the risk of those age-related diseases.
So he's not just talking about losing weight or managing diabetes, he's talking about actually slowing down the aging process.
Exactly. He thinks keto can help people live longer, healthier lives.
Is there any evidence to back that up?
There is some interesting research, but mostly in animals. Studies have shown that limiting calories and certain nutrients, including carbs, can make some animals live longer.
So some evidence from animal studies, but what about humans?
Research on human lifespan is much harder to do. It's hard to isolate the effects of any single diet because so many other things affect how long we live.
Yeah, it would take a really long study to track people's diets their whole lives and see if keto makes a difference.
It would be a challenge. But there are some observational studies in humans that kind of support Smith's claims.
Oh, interesting. What have they found?
Some studies have found that people who traditionally eat lower-carb diets tend to have fewer age-related diseases and live longer.
So there's a connection, but that doesn't mean the low-carb diet is the reason they live longer.
Right. Other things about their lifestyles or where they live could also be factors.
I guess it's hard to isolate just one thing when you're talking about something as complex as human aging.
It is. But I think it's fair to say the research on keto and longevity is pretty interesting and worth looking into further.
I agree. Definitely something to watch as more research comes out. So, besides the IGF-1 argument, does Smith have any other explanations for how keto affects aging?
Yes, he also talks about oxidative stress and inflammation in the aging
Oh,
process.
I've heard those terms before, but what do they really mean?
Oxidative stress is when there's an imbalance between free radicals, which are unstable molecules that can damage cells, and your body's ability to fight those free radicals with antioxidants.
So it's like a battle between bad molecules and the body's defenses.
Exactly. As we get older, that balance can shift, leading to more oxidative stress, which is thought to be a part of why we age.
So how does inflammation fit in?
Inflammation is a natural part of how the body heals, but chronic low-grade inflammation seems to contribute to many age-related diseases.
So it's like the inflammation switch gets stuck in the on position as we age, and that's when it starts causing problems.
Good analogy. And Smith says that keto can help reduce both oxidative stress and inflammation, which could slow down aging.
Okay, I can see how that would work, but how does keto actually do that? What's the mechanism?
He has a few ideas. First, he says keto reduces the production of free radicals, those damaging molecules that cause oxidative stress.
So what we eat can actually change how many free radicals our bodies make.
That's what he claims. He says eating fewer carbs and more healthy fats reduces the processes that create those free radicals.
Interesting. And what about inflammation? How does he say keto helps with that?
He points to a few things, including the possible anti-inflammatory properties of ketones, like BHB, which we talked about earlier, and the fact that blood sugar levels are more stable on a keto diet.
Makes sense. Stable blood sugar should mean less inflammation.
Exactly. And he also says it's important to choose anti-inflammatory foods on keto, foods that are high in antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids.
So it's not just being in ketosis, it's about making good food choices while you're doing it.
Exactly. It's about a holistic approach, changing your diet and your lifestyle to age healthily.
That sounds like a good approach, but are there any studies showing that keto actually reduces oxidative stress and inflammation in people?
There's some promising research, but it's an area that needs more study. Some studies have found that keto diets can reduce markers of oxidative stress and inflammation in people who are obese or have type 2 diabetes.
So we have evidence for specific groups of people, but we need more research to understand how keto affects oxidative stress and inflammation in everyone.
Exactly. It's an interesting area, and we'll probably know a lot more in the future.
Well, this has been a great discussion about Smith's claims on keto and living longer. It sounds like there's potential, but we should be careful about saying too much until we have more evidence.
I agree. It's important to look at this with a balanced view.
Now let's talk about another area where Smith makes some big claims: keto's role in improving cognitive function and brain health.
He's really excited about keto's potential to make your brain work better and protect you from cognitive decline.
I've heard a lot about brain foods and staying sharp as we age, so this is really interesting to me. What does he say about how keto affects the brain?
He says keto has several benefits for your brain, including better energy metabolism, less inflammation, and improved neurotransmitter function.
Okay, let's take those one at a time. First, energy metabolism. How does keto affect how the brain uses energy?
He explains that your brain usually uses glucose for energy, but when you're in ketosis, your brain can switch to using ketones as fuel.
So the brain can use either glucose or ketones for energy. What's the advantage of using ketones?
He thinks ketones are a better fuel for the brain, leading to better cognitive function and less brain fog.
So it's like upgrading your brain's fuel.
You could say that. He thinks ketones provide a more stable and consistent energy supply for your brain than glucose does.
That's interesting. What about inflammation? We talked about how it can be harmful as we get older. Does he say it's bad for the brain too?
He does. He emphasizes that chronic inflammation is a major contributor to cognitive decline and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
So if keto reduces inflammation, that could benefit the brain.
Exactly. He thinks that reducing inflammation with a keto diet can protect your brain from damage and potentially slow down cognitive decline.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about neurotransmitter function? How does keto affect those chemicals in the brain?
He explains that keto can affect how different neurotransmitters are made and how they work, including GABA, glutamate, and dopamine.
I've heard of those. They affect things like mood, sleep, and motivation, right?
They do. GABA helps you relax and feel less anxious. Glutamate is involved in learning and memory, and dopamine is linked to reward, motivation, and pleasure.
So he's saying keto affects all of those important brain chemicals. How does it do that?
He says that keto changes the levels of certain amino acids in your blood, and that can impact the production and activity of these neurotransmitters.
Okay, but what does that really mean? How would those changes actually affect how your brain works?
He says these changes can improve your mood, help you sleep better, improve focus, memory, and overall cognitive performance.
So basically, he's saying keto can make you feel better, sleep better, think more clearly, and remember things more easily.
That's the idea. He believes keto can have a very positive impact on how your brain works.
That's amazing. But is there any evidence to back that up?
There's more and more research being done on keto and brain health, and some of it looks promising.
Really? What have those studies shown?
Some studies have shown that keto can improve cognitive function in people with mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease.
So there's evidence that keto can help people who are already having problems with their thinking. What about healthy people? Can keto help them think better?
There are some studies that suggest keto might benefit healthy people too, maybe by improving memory, focus, and mental clarity. But we need more research to be sure.
It sounds like there's potential there, but we need more research to really understand how keto affects the brain.
Exactly. It's a fascinating area of research, and I think we'll see a lot more research being done in the next few years.
Well, this has been really informative. We've gone through Smith's personal story, his keto rules, and the potential benefits of ketosis for weight loss, insulin sensitivity, longevity, and even brain health. It seems like a lot of people are interested in this way of eating, and there's a lot of debate about it.
It's definitely a hot topic.
Yeah.
And while some of what Smith says might be exaggerated or oversimplified, we should recognize that some of his arguments do have scientific support.
Right. It's not all just hype. There's real research being done, and we're learning more and more about keto.
Exactly. And as with any diet, it's important to be critical, look at all the evidence, and make decisions based on your own needs and goals.
Well said. Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about how science is always changing.
You mean how what we think is true today might not be true tomorrow?
Yeah, that's it. It's humbling to realize that our knowledge is always growing, and we might have to change our beliefs as we learn new things.
It's a reminder to stay open-minded and be willing to change our views as new evidence comes out.
Absolutely. So I want to leave our listeners with something to think about as they try to make sense of all the nutrition information out there.
I'm listening. What do you have in mind?
If our understanding of nutrition is always changing, what other things we believe about health and diet might be proven wrong in the future? What truths that we believe now might turn out to be myths? It's something to think about.
It is. It reminds us to stay curious, be open to new ideas, and be willing to adjust our views as we learn more.
Exactly. So I think it's time to wrap up our discussion of Richard Smith's video about keto truth.
It's been a fascinating look at his claims, separating his compelling story from the more complex scientific realities.
We've covered a lot of ground, from his health transformation to his criticisms of typical dietary advice, his 5 keto rules, and his arguments about the potential benefits of ketosis for weight loss, insulin sensitivity, longevity, and brain health.
And while we've shown how some of his ideas align with research, we've also emphasized the need for critical thinking, balanced perspectives, and personalized approaches.
So as our listener takes all this in, what are some key things they should remember?
First of all, nutrition is complicated, and there's rarely a simple answer.
Right, it's not as easy as saying, this food is good, this food is bad.
Exactly. You have to understand the details, consider what works for each person, and make choices based on the best available evidence.
And even when the evidence seems strong, it's crucial to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation.
Just because two things are linked doesn't mean one causes the other. We need good scientific studies to show cause and effect.
We also have to be careful about confirmation bias, which is when we only look for information that supports what we already believe.
It's easy to fall into that trap, especially with health and nutrition, where our experiences and beliefs can be very strong.
So how can our listener make sense of all this complicated and often conflicting information about nutrition?
By becoming a smart consumer of information. Question everything, get different perspectives, and rely on sources you can trust.
So instead of trusting social media or what people say, look for information that's based on scientific research.
Exactly. And remember that personal stories can be powerful, but they don't always reflect what's true for everyone. What works for one person might not work for you.
So it's not just about what your friend or your favorite influencer says. It's about looking at the bigger picture and considering the scientific evidence.
Right. And it's also important to think about who's giving you the information and whether they might be biased. Do they have something to gain financially, or do they have a particular agenda they're trying to push?
So always ask yourself, who's saying this and why?
Exactly. Be a critical thinker and don't just accept everything you read or hear.
And I think it's always a good idea to talk to a healthcare professional, like a registered dietitian or a doctor, to get advice that's right for you.
Definitely. Those professionals are trained to understand the science, assess your needs, and give you guidance based on your specific situation.
So while it's good to learn from things like Richard Smith's video, it's important to remember that it's just one person's view, and it's not a replacement for getting personalized advice from a healthcare professional.
That's a great point. Use this information as a starting point, and then seek professional guidance to create a plan that works for you.
Well said. I think that's a great place to end our discussion of Richard Smith's Keto Truth video.
It's been a really interesting journey exploring his claims.
We've covered a lot, from his incredible personal story to his critiques of conventional wisdom, his 5 keto rules, and his arguments about the possible benefits of ketosis for weight loss, insulin sensitivity, living longer, and brain health.
And while we've pointed out where his claims are backed by research, we've also stressed the importance of critical thinking, balanced perspectives, and personalized approaches.
So, what should our listener take away from all of this?
Remember that nutrition is a complex and constantly evolving field. What works for one person may not work for another, and it's essential to understand the nuances, consider individual factors, and make informed choices based on the best available evidence.
And even when evidence seems strong, remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. We need solid scientific studies to prove that one thing causes another.
We also need to be aware of our own biases and be willing to question our beliefs as new information emerges.
So to navigate this world of nutrition information, become a savvy consumer. Question everything, seek out different perspectives, and rely on credible sources.
Look for evidence-based information and expert consensus rather than relying on personal stories or attention-grabbing headlines.
And if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
That's a good rule of thumb for anything, especially health and nutrition.
So the bottom line is, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to nutrition.
Exactly. You have to find what works best for you based on your own needs and goals.
And that often means working with a healthcare professional who can help you create a personalized plan.
Absolutely. They can help you evaluate the evidence, understand your individual needs, and guide you towards strategies that are right for you.
So while learning from sources like Richard Smith's video is valuable, it's crucial to remember that it's just one perspective and doesn't replace getting personalized advice from a healthcare professional.
That's a great point. Use this information as a starting point for your own exploration, and then get professional guidance to develop a plan that works for you.
Well said. This deep dive into Richard Smith's Keto Truth video has been fascinating. I hope it was informative and helpful for everyone listening.
Me too. I hope our listeners feel inspired to keep learning about nutrition and health, to always question what they hear, and to make choices that support their well-being.
Remember, there's always more to learn and new things to discover. So stay curious, keep an open mind, and keep exploring.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it really has. Smith's claims are definitely thought-provoking, even if some of them are, well, a bit out there.
True. It's a good reminder that nutrition is complex, and there are so many different opinions out there.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
And it seems like the more we learn about nutrition, the more we realize we still have a lot to figure out.
Absolutely. It's a constantly evolving field, and we're always making new discoveries. That's what makes it so fascinating, right?
It does. It's like a never-ending puzzle. So as our listeners continue to learn about nutrition and health, what are some things they should keep in mind?
Well, I think it's important to remember that nutrition isn't about finding the perfect diet or following strict rules. It's about making choices that help you feel your best and support your overall well-being.
That makes sense. It sounds a lot more sustainable than constantly stressing about every single thing you eat. Right. It's about finding a way of eating that nourishes your body and fits into your life.
And I think we also need to be critical of those claims that sound too good to be true, or those that tell you to avoid entire food groups.
I agree. Nutrition is full of nuances, and it's rarely as simple as saying this food is good and that food is bad.
So what are some practical things people can do to become more informed about nutrition?
Be wary of attention-grabbing headlines and those really extreme claims. Look for reliable sources that base their information on evidence.
So basically, do your research.
Exactly. And look for information that's supported by scientific studies, not just anecdotes or what someone said on social media.
Right, because just because something worked for one person doesn't mean it will work for everyone.
That's right. And it's also important to be aware of potential biases. Think about who's giving you the information and what their motivations might be. Do they have something to sell, or are they trying to push a particular agenda?
So always ask yourself who's saying this and why.
Exactly. Be a critical thinker, and don't just believe everything you read or hear. And if you're ever unsure about something, talk to a healthcare professional.
That's a great point. A registered dietitian or a doctor can give you personalized advice based on your specific needs and goals.
Absolutely. They're trained to understand the science and help you make informed decisions about your health.
So while we can learn a lot from things like Richard Smith's video, it's important to remember that it's just one perspective.
Right. It's a great jumping-off point for learning more, but it's not a substitute for getting personalized advice from a qualified healthcare professional.
Well said. I think that wraps up our deep dive into Richard Smith's Keto Truth video. It's been an interesting journey, that's for sure.
It has lots of intriguing ideas and a good reminder to stay curious and keep learning.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you found this deep dive informative and maybe even a little bit challenging.
We encourage you to keep exploring the world of nutrition and health. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, keep making those choices that help you feel your best.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. It's